Life, my friends, is not a simple journey. We are constantly faced with challenges, burdens, and moments of overwhelming stress. Some days it feels like everything is against us. We look at the weight of the world pressing down on our shoulders, and we wonder how we will ever bear it. But let me tell you something you need to hear today. God is using your stress for something greater. Too many times we view the difficult moments in our lives as the enemy. We fight against them, we despair, and we wish they would go away. We forget that, in the economy of God's kingdom, what seems like a burden may very well be the very thing He is using to refine us, to shape us, and to draw us closer to Him. Stress can be crushing. It can bring you to your knees, make you question your purpose, and push you to the very edge of your limits. But don't you see? In those moments when you feel like you're about to break, when it seems like everything is falling apart, there's something happening beneath the surface that you cannot see. In the midst of your stress, God is at work. He is molding you, stretching you, and preparing you for something far greater than what you can understand right now. When you go through trials, it is not a sign that God has abandoned you, far from it. It is a sign that He is using those very moments of difficulty to produce in you something of eternal value. The trials and stress you face are not pointless. They are a tool in the hand of God, chiseling away at the rough edges of your character, shaping you into the person you were always meant to be. The weight you feel today may be the catalyst for the strength you will need tomorrow. God never wastes a moment of your suffering. He uses it to teach you lessons that you could never learn otherwise. When you feel like you're drowning in stress, remember, it is in the deepest waters where we often find the clearest view of God's faithfulness. It is when we are weak, when we cannot go any further, that His strength is made perfect in us. You may feel like you're failing. You may think that you're simply not enough. But let me remind you, you are not being broken by your stress, you are being built by it. Every trial, every moment of pressure is a chance for you to lean into Him more deeply, to trust Him more fully, and to grow more into the person He has called you to be. When the world tells you to give up, when the pressure seems unbearable, remember that there is a divine purpose behind every hardship. It is shaping your faith, refining your character, and preparing you for a destiny far greater than you could ever imagine. You must trust in His sovereignty. You must know that He is in control. The weight you carry today will not crush you, it will transform you. And in time you will look back and see that what you thought was a burden was in fact the very thing that led you to greater joy, greater peace, and a deeper relationship with Him. So do not despair. Do not run from the stress. Embrace it, knowing that God is using it for something greater. You are not alone. You are being shaped, and in the end you will emerge stronger than ever before. We must remember this truth. The pressure, the weight, and the struggle are not here to destroy us. They are here to refine us and to make us into vessels that God can use for His greater glory. And when that moment comes, you will understand that the stress you once thought would break you is actually what God used to build you up. The challenges and stress we experience in life often feel overwhelming. When faced with trials, many of us view these moments as setbacks, obstacles that seem to be standing in our way, hindering us from reaching our goals and fulfilling our purpose. The weight of stress can make it hard to see beyond the moment, and sometimes it feels like there is no end in sight. Yet there is a deeper reality that we often overlook. God uses our stress for growth. It is not a burden that He has imposed upon us aimlessly. Rather, it is a tool He uses to refine us, shape our character, and prepare us for the future He has planned for us. Stress, in and of itself, is not inherently bad. In fact, it's often through times of difficulty and pressure that we are stretched and challenged in ways we would never have experienced otherwise. We grow in the areas we are most uncomfortable with. The discomfort of stress forces us to confront our limitations, our weaknesses, and our fears. But instead of allowing those pressures to crush us, we can choose to allow them to push us toward God, toward deeper dependence on Him. The pain we endure during times of stress is not in vain. It has a higher purpose. It's a refining fire that burns away impurities, leaving behind something pure and valuable. When we face moments of stress, it's easy to question our worth, to wonder why we are facing these trials, and to feel as though we are failing. But we need to remember that God does not waste our suffering. Every challenge we face is carefully orchestrated by Him to accomplish something greater in our lives. He doesn't want us to be defeated by stress. He wants to use it to mold us into something better. The refining process is never easy, but it is necessary for our spiritual growth. Just as gold must be refined in fire to remove the impurities and reveal its true worth, so too must we endure times of pressure to become the people God is calling us to be. Consider how stress builds resilience in us. It forces us to confront problems head-on, to develop problem-solving skills, and to seek out wisdom and support from others. It compels us to dig deep and tap into reservoirs of strength we didn't even know we had. Without stress, we might remain stagnant, comfortable in our complacency, never pushing beyond our limits. But the trials and challenges we face drive us to grow, to develop patience, to strengthen our faith, and to cultivate perseverance. We are forced to learn how to lean on God, to trust in His provision and His guidance, even when the path is unclear and the weight of our burdens seems too heavy to bear. In moments of stress, we also begin to understand more about God's faithfulness. When life feels like it's falling apart, it is in those very moments that we experience His presence most profoundly. Stress brings us to the end of ourselves, where we realize that we cannot handle everything on our own. And that's where God steps in. When we are weak, He is strong. Our greatest moments of growth often come when we can no longer rely on our own strength and must turn to Him fully. Through our stress, we begin to see that we are not alone, that God is with us, guiding us through each trial, carrying us when we cannot walk on our own. Stress also teaches us the value of trusting God's timing. We may feel the urge to rush through difficult situations to escape the pressure or to find an easy way out. However, God's plans are always better than our own. The growth that comes through stress takes time, and it often requires us to wait on Him. It's easy to become frustrated and anxious when things aren't happening as quickly as we would like. But we must remember that God is never in a hurry. He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating everything for our good. The very stress we feel today could be preparing us for something far greater in the future, something we might not even be able to see yet. We also need to understand that God's refining work through stress is not just for our personal growth, but it also prepares us to help others. The pain we endure, the lessons we learn, and the ways we overcome stress become tools we can use to encourage and support others who are going through similar struggles. Our journey of overcoming stress becomes a testimony of God's faithfulness that can inspire others to trust Him through their own trials. Our growth is not only for our benefit but for the benefit of those around us as well. Through our stress, we become vessels of encouragement, hope, and strength for others. In all of this, we are reminded that stress is not the end of the story. It is a chapter in a much larger narrative that God is writing in our lives. He is using it to refine us, to strengthen us, and to draw us closer to Himself. The challenges we face may feel unbearable at times, but they are not without purpose. God is using them to shape us into the people He created us to be, people who will shine His light in a dark world. So rather than avoiding stress or wishing it away, we can choose to embrace it, knowing that it is through the fire that we are refined, and it is through the pressure that we are made stronger. Through it all, God is working for our good and His glory. Our trials and suffering are not a random occurrence or something that happens to us without purpose. Far too often we view hardship as a sign of defeat, thinking that God has turned His back on us. But this is far from the truth. In reality, our suffering is not a sign of God's absence, but a clear sign of His presence, His deep involvement in our lives, and His unwavering commitment to our growth. It is in those moments of pain and hardship that God is at work, shaping our character and refining us for a greater purpose. God uses our suffering to teach us lessons that we would never learn in comfort. Through the fires of adversity, He forges in us a faith that is unshakable, a character that is refined, and a hope that is steadfast. One of the hardest things to accept is the idea that God allows suffering. We tend to think that a loving God would never let His people endure hardship, but Scripture paints a different picture. God's love is not a promise of an easy life, rather it is a promise that He will be with us through every trial, that He will use our suffering for a greater purpose. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans 5:3-4, "We also rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character hope." Notice how suffering is the starting point, the catalyst that leads to perseverance, which in turn produces character and ultimately leads to hope. Our suffering does not have to be the end of the story. It is the beginning of something greater. It is through the fires of adversity that our faith is made stronger, our dependence on God deepens, and our trust in His sovereignty becomes unshakable. Many of us wish we could avoid hardship, that we could somehow skip over the painful parts of life. But if we are honest with ourselves, we know that it is during our most difficult moments that we experience the most profound growth. The pain, the struggle, the weight of life, these are the things that drive us to our knees, that cause us to reach out to God with a desperate cry for help. It is in those moments of weakness that we experience His strength. It is in those times of stress and pressure that we learn to rely on Him in a way we never would have otherwise. Our reliance on God grows stronger in times of struggle because we realize that we cannot handle life on our own. We must lean on Him, we must trust Him. Our suffering teaches us that this world is not our ultimate home, that we were created for something far greater than this temporary life. When we experience hardship, it serves as a reminder that we are pilgrims on a journey, that our true home is in heaven, and that the troubles of this world are but momentary. Through our struggles, God helps us to set our eyes on eternal things, not the temporary things that fade away. The pain of today may be intense, but it is nothing compared to the glory that will be revealed in us in the days to come. It is through suffering that we begin to detach ourselves from the things of this world and set our hearts and minds on things above. We begin to see life from God's eternal perspective, and in that we find peace, comfort, and hope. Moreover, our suffering is not without purpose. It serves as a testimony to others. When we endure hardship with faith and trust in God, it becomes a powerful witness to those around us. They begin to see that there is something different about our response to suffering. They see a strength in us that doesn't come from ourselves, a peace that doesn't make sense in the midst of trials, and a joy that cannot be explained. Our perseverance in the face of hardship becomes a living testimony of God's faithfulness, and it draws others to Him. People look at our lives and wonder how we can endure such trials with grace, and that opens the door for us to share the hope that we have in Christ. Through suffering, God also teaches us compassion. We cannot truly empathize with others unless we have walked through the fire ourselves. When we experience pain, we gain a deeper understanding of the struggles others are facing, and that enables us to minister to them with authenticity and compassion. We can say to them, "I know what it feels like to suffer, but I also know what it's like to experience God's faithfulness in the midst of it." Our own trials become the very platform from which we can serve others and point them to the hope found in Christ. The lessons we learn through suffering equip us to be a source of encouragement and strength to those who are walking through their own battles. In the end, God uses suffering to conform us to the image of Christ. Jesus Himself endured unimaginable suffering on the cross, and in doing so, He showed us the depth of God's love and the power of redemption. When we suffer, we are being conformed to His likeness, becoming more like Him in our character and in our dependence on God. It is through suffering that we learn to identify with Christ in a deeper way, and in that, we are able to experience a closeness with Him that is only possible through hardship. God is not punishing us through suffering. He is refining us, preparing us, and using our struggles for His glory. Through our suffering, we become more like Christ, and that is the greatest transformation we can experience. The reality of suffering is a difficult truth to accept, but it is in that very suffering that we experience the richness of God's grace, the depth of His love, and the power of His presence. Rather than seeing suffering as something to avoid or run from, we must learn to embrace it as part of God's process of shaping us, refining us, and preparing us for something greater. God does not waste our pain. He uses it for our good, for His glory, and for the sake of others. And in the end, we emerge from our trials stronger, more refined, and more deeply rooted in our faith. In times of hardship, we must learn to lean into God's promises, knowing that He will never leave us nor forsake us. Even in our darkest moments, He is with us, refining us for the future He has planned. Through our suffering, He is at work, shaping us into the people He has called us to be, and we can trust that He is using it for something far greater than we could ever imagine. When we face times of stress and hardship, it is natural to feel overwhelmed, discouraged, and at times even defeated. We are confronted with problems that seem insurmountable, with circumstances that seem impossible to change. Yet, in the midst of our struggles, it is essential to remember that these moments of stress are not the end of the story. They are often the beginning of something far greater. God uses these difficult seasons to produce in us a resilience and a strength that we could never develop without the pressure of the trials we face. When we are stressed, we often feel that we are being pushed to our limits. We feel as though we cannot take one more step, that we cannot endure any longer. But it is precisely in these moments that God is working in us, refining our character and shaping our hearts. Just as a muscle grows stronger through resistance, so too does our faith grow stronger through the resistance we face in life. The weight of stress may feel unbearable at times, but it is through that pressure that God is preparing us for something greater. We might not see it now, but our trials are preparing us for the future God has for us. The key to understanding this truth is recognizing that God does not waste our struggles. In fact, every trial, every moment of stress is an opportunity for God to refine us. The Apostle James encourages us to consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance, James 1:2-3. What seems like an insurmountable challenge in the moment is actually a tool in God's hands, used to produce perseverance in us. As we persevere through difficulty, we are strengthened. Our character is shaped and transformed in ways that would never have been possible without the pressure. Moreover, perseverance through stress builds something deeper within us, a trust in God's faithfulness. When life is easy, it is easy to trust in our own abilities, to rely on our own strength and understanding. But when we face overwhelming stress, we are forced to rely on God in a way that we never would have if everything was smooth sailing. In the midst of our trials, we learn that we cannot carry our burdens on our own. We learn to lean on God, to depend on His wisdom, His provision, and His strength. Through these moments, we come to understand that God is not distant or detached from our pain. Rather, He is right there with us, walking alongside us and carrying us when we cannot go any further. As we experience God's faithfulness in the midst of our struggles, our trust in Him grows deeper. We begin to see that He truly is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in times of trouble, Psalm 46:1. Stress also serves as a refining fire in our lives, burning away the impurities and distractions that keep us from fully surrendering to God. It is easy to become consumed by the cares of this world, to prioritize things that do not matter in the grand scheme of eternity. But when stress enters our lives, it forces us to reevaluate our priorities. We are confronted with what truly matters: our relationship with God, the health of our souls, and the eternal promises of His kingdom. Stress helps us to strip away the superficial distractions and focus on the things that will last. It refines our hearts, making us more committed to God's will, more focused on His purposes, and less concerned with the temporary things of this world. Through the pain and struggle of stress, we are reminded that we are not in control. This is one of the most powerful lessons we can learn in life: that we cannot manage everything, and we certainly cannot control everything. We are fragile, limited, and dependent on God for everything. It is only in recognizing our limitations that we can truly experience God's power working through us. When we reach the end of ourselves, we encounter the fullness of God's grace. In our weakness, His strength is made perfect. Stress humbles us, teaching us to trust in God's sovereign control over our lives, no matter how chaotic or out of control things may seem. It forces us to submit our desires, our plans, and our fears to His will, knowing that He is good, and that He works all things together for the good of those who love Him, Romans 8:28. In the midst of stress, we also come to understand the power of perseverance and how it strengthens us. Life is full of difficulties, but it is the ability to persevere through them that allows us to experience growth. Perseverance is not simply about enduring through difficult circumstances, it is about remaining faithful in the midst of those circumstances. It is about continuing to trust in God's goodness, even when we cannot see the end of the trial. When we persevere, we demonstrate a faith that is unwavering, a faith that holds on to God's promises even when everything around us seems uncertain. In this perseverance, we grow stronger spiritually, becoming more like Christ in the process. It is in the darkest moments, when we feel like giving up, that we are often closest to God. He is working in us, transforming us, and preparing us for something far greater. The stress we face today may seem like it will break us, but if we choose to persevere, we will find that it will ultimately make us stronger. We will emerge from the fire with a faith that is more resilient, a character that is more refined, and a hope that is unshakable. As we learn to persevere through stress, we also begin to understand that our struggles are not just for our benefit. God uses our struggles to equip us to help others. When we endure hardship with faith and grace, we become a source of encouragement for those who are facing similar challenges. We can look back on our own struggles and say to others, "I have been through this, and I know that God will bring you through as well." Our trials become a testimony of God's faithfulness, and through them we can bring hope to those who are struggling. The stress we experience today is not wasted. It is the very thing God is using to shape us, refine us, and prepare us for the future He has for us. Rather than avoiding stress or wishing it away, we can choose to embrace it, knowing that God is at work in the midst of it. In the end, we will emerge stronger, more faithful, and more equipped to fulfill the purpose He has called us to. Through stress, God is making us more like Christ, and that is a work that is always worth enduring. In the midst of stress, there is an important truth that we often forget. God is refining us for something greater. When we are overwhelmed, when the pressure mounts, we tend to focus only on the burden itself, forgetting that the weight of our trials is being used by God to shape us into better, stronger versions of ourselves. We are being refined in the fire, just as gold is purified through intense heat. When we face difficulties, it is easy to become consumed by the immediate discomfort of our struggles, but God is working beneath the surface, using the very stress we feel to mold us for a higher purpose. The refining process is never easy, but it is essential for our spiritual growth. Gold must go through the heat of the furnace to become pure and valuable, and in the same way, our faith and character are purified through the trials we face. The Apostle James writes, "Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." James 1:2-3. We are not to rejoice in the pain itself, but in the fact that God uses that pain to produce something greater in us. Perseverance is developed through struggle, and perseverance, in turn, leads to maturity and completeness. If we shy away from the stress we experience, we are avoiding the very thing that will make us more like Christ. It is through difficulty that we learn to rely on God, to lean on His strength, and to trust in His purpose for our lives. Stress also works in us by revealing our true selves, exposing the areas where we are weak and vulnerable. We often think we are in control, that we can handle everything that life throws at us. But when stress hits, it shows us just how fragile we are. It is through the pressures of life that we begin to see our limitations, our weaknesses, and our dependence on God. This is not a negative thing. On the contrary, it is in these moments of weakness that we encounter God's grace most profoundly. The Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 12:9, "But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me.'" It is through our weaknesses, our stress, and our struggles that God's power is made evident. We are reminded that we are not meant to carry life's burdens alone. In our weakest moments, we can lean into God's strength, knowing that He will sustain us and use our weaknesses for His glory. In the process of refining, we learn to trust God more deeply. Trust is not built in moments of comfort, but in moments of trial. When everything is going well, it's easy to feel self-sufficient, to believe that we have everything under control. But when stress enters the picture, when things seem out of control, we are forced to put our trust in God. Trusting God means acknowledging that He is sovereign, that He is in control of every aspect of our lives, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. The psalmist writes in Psalm 56:3, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you." Trusting God in times of stress is a deliberate choice. It is a choice to believe that He is good, even when life seems bad. It is a choice to believe that He is faithful, even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. Trust grows stronger when we choose to rely on God in times of trouble, when we place our fears, anxieties, and struggles into His hands. As we grow in trust, we also learn to rely on God's timing. We often wish we could hurry through the process of stress, wishing for an immediate resolution to our difficulties. But God's timing is perfect, and He uses the waiting periods in our lives to teach us valuable lessons. We must learn to trust that He knows what is best for us, that He is working in ways we cannot always see. When we are stressed, it is easy to become impatient, to wonder why things are not changing, why the burden is not being lifted. But God's timing is not like ours. His ways are higher than ours, and He is always working behind the scenes to bring about His perfect will. The waiting periods of stress are not wasted. They are times of preparation, times in which God is strengthening us, developing our character, and preparing us for what lies ahead. We may not understand the purpose behind the stress we are experiencing, but we can trust that God is using it for our good. Another important lesson that stress teaches us is the value of perseverance. Perseverance is the ability to keep going when we feel like giving up. It is the strength to endure through hardship, to hold fast to our faith even when the road gets rough. Stress is often the catalyst that builds perseverance in our lives. When we face difficult situations, when we are overwhelmed by the weight of our burdens, we have a choice. We can either give up or we can keep going. Perseverance is not something that comes easily. It is something that is developed over time, through repeated trials and challenges. Every time we choose to press forward in the face of stress, we are building the perseverance that will carry us through the next trial. The writer of Hebrews encourages us to run with perseverance the race marked out for us, Hebrews 12:1. This race is not always easy, and there will be times when we feel like giving up, but perseverance allows us to finish the race and reach the goal. We are not meant to go through life without hardship. It is through hardship that we build the perseverance we need to continue on, to keep moving forward, and to remain faithful to God's calling in our lives. Ultimately, stress is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced as a tool that God uses to shape and mold us. It is in the midst of stress that we grow the most, that we are refined, that we learn to trust more deeply, and that we are prepared for the future that God has in store for us. While the weight of stress may be heavy, it is never without purpose. Through it, God is developing in us the strength, character, and perseverance we need to fulfill the purpose He has set for our lives. We can trust that He is with us in the midst of our stress, that He is using it to refine us, and that He will bring us through it stronger than before. In the midst of our trials and stressful moments, one of the most important truths we must understand is that stress is not something to be feared, but rather something to be embraced as part of God's plan for our growth. We live in a world that often tells us to avoid discomfort, to seek a life of ease and comfort, but this mentality leads us to miss the deeper, transformative purpose that stress can serve in our lives. Stress is not a punishment, it is an opportunity for growth. When we face challenges, we are given the chance to become stronger, more resilient, and more like Christ. God uses the stress in our lives to mold our character, sharpen our faith, and refine us for the greater purpose He has planned for us. We cannot always control the stresses we face, but we can choose how we respond to them. When we respond with faith, perseverance, and trust in God, we allow Him to use the pressure to bring about a greater good in our lives. One of the most important lessons we can learn through stress is how to surrender our own will and control to God. In times of stress, we often feel a desperate need to fix the situation, to solve the problem, or to make the stress go away. We want things to return to normal, to have control over the outcome, but the reality is that we often cannot control the circumstances we are facing. What we can control is how we respond. In those moments, we are called to surrender to God's will, to trust that He is in control even when things feel chaotic and out of control. Surrendering to God in the midst of stress means acknowledging that we are not in charge, that our own understanding is limited, and that we must trust in His perfect timing and plan. This is one of the hardest things to do because it requires letting go of our desire for control. But it is in surrender that we find true peace, knowing that God is working all things together for our good. As we surrender, we begin to see stress not as an obstacle to avoid, but as an opportunity to grow in our trust in God's sovereignty. Another critical lesson stress teaches us is the importance of perspective. In the heat of stress, it is easy to become consumed by our problems, to focus solely on the overwhelming weight of our burdens. But if we allow ourselves to zoom out and gain an eternal perspective, we begin to see our struggles in light of the bigger picture. Stress and difficulty are temporary, and while they may seem insurmountable in the moment, they are not the end of our story. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans 8:18, "I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us." What we experience in this life is momentary and fleeting compared to the eternal glory that awaits us. Our struggles, painful as they may be, are preparing us for something greater. When we learn to view our stress from an eternal perspective, we gain the strength to endure and the hope to press forward. We are reminded that this world is not our home, and the trials we face today are not the end of the story. God is using them to prepare us for something far greater that is yet to come. This eternal perspective allows us to endure hardship with joy, knowing that our suffering is not in vain, and that God is at work even in the midst of our stress. Stress also teaches us the value of relying on God's strength rather than our own. In times of stress, we often feel like we are running on empty, that we have nothing left to give. We feel weak, overwhelmed, and incapable of handling the weight of our struggles. It is precisely in these moments that God invites us to rely on His strength, not our own. We were never meant to bear the weight of the world alone. God does not expect us to handle everything on our own. He longs for us to lean on Him, to trust in His ability to carry us through. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul writes, "But He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." When we come to the end of ourselves, when we realize that we cannot carry our burdens alone, we encounter God's grace, and strength in a new way. Stress reveals our weakness, but it is in that weakness that God's power is made perfect. We learn to rely on God's grace to carry us through our trials, and in doing so we find that His strength is more than enough. We may not have the strength to face the challenges on our own, but God's strength is limitless, and He is faithful to provide it when we need it most. Through stress, we learn to depend on God in ways that we never would have otherwise.